He was just an ordinary man doing janitorial work at West Point Military Academy until he overheard a secret training session conducted in Chinese during his night shift. His 20 years of intelligence experience told him one thing: this wasn't just a language class, this was foreign agent training. And now, he was the only witness to a spy operation at America's most prestigious military school. But before we dive into this incredible story, if you're new here, welcome to The Last Witness. We share the most amazing untold stories of ordinary people with extraordinary secrets. Stories where someone becomes the final witness to incredible events. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest stories. And if you enjoy this story, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps us continue bringing you these incredible tales. Now, let's get back to Frank's story. Frank Miller had been working as a night janitor at the United States Military Academy at West Point for 5 years, maintaining the historic buildings and classrooms where America's future military leaders were trained. At 55, with calloused hands and the quiet demeanor of someone who preferred to work without attracting attention, Frank appeared to be exactly what he was: a civilian maintenance worker, keeping the prestigious institution clean and functional. What the cadets, faculty, and administrators didn't know was that Frank Miller had spent 20 years as a senior intelligence analyst with Army military intelligence, specializing in foreign military capabilities and counterintelligence operations. His knowledge of enemy tactics, surveillance techniques, and espionage methods had been among the most valuable assets in the Army's intelligence arsenal. Frank's intelligence career had involved analyzing threats from foreign adversaries, identifying infiltration attempts against American military institutions, and developing countermeasures to protect classified information from enemy agents. He'd worked on some of the Army's most sensitive counterintelligence operations, helping to identify and neutralize foreign spies operating within the United States. Frank's specialty had been understanding how foreign intelligence services recruited and trained their agents, particularly how they infiltrated American institutions to gather intelligence or influence policy decisions. He'd studied the methods used by Chinese, Russian, and other foreign intelligence agencies to place operatives in sensitive positions within the American government and military. Frank's intelligence career had ended in 2018 when a reorganization eliminated his position along with many others in the Army's counterintelligence division. Despite his exemplary service record and deep expertise, Frank found himself facing mandatory retirement with limited options for continuing his career in intelligence work. The transition to civilian employment had been difficult. Frank's specialized knowledge of counterintelligence and foreign threats wasn't easily transferable to civilian careers, and most private sector positions that valued his expertise required security clearances that were difficult to maintain outside government service. The janitorial position at West Point had initially been a temporary solution while Frank figured out his next career move. But 5 years later, he discovered that he actually enjoyed the work and the environment. Being at West Point allowed him to remain connected to the military community he'd served for 2 decades, even if his current role was very different from his previous intelligence work. Frank approached his janitorial duties with the same methodical attention to detail that had characterized his intelligence career. He knew every building on the West Point campus, understood the rhythms of academic and military life at the academy, and had developed relationships with faculty and staff who appreciated his reliability and discretion. But Frank's intelligence background also made him naturally observant of activities and behaviors that might seem normal to other maintenance workers. He couldn't help but notice when classrooms were used for unofficial meetings, when faculty worked unusual hours, or when visitors to the academy didn't quite fit the profile of typical guests. Most of the time, these observations were simply interesting details about life at a complex institution. West Point attracted visitors from around the world, hosted international exchange programs, and conducted research that sometimes required non-standard scheduling or security procedures. Frank had never encountered anything at West Point that triggered his counterintelligence training or suggested unauthorized activities. That changed on a Thursday night in October 2023, during his routine cleaning of Thayer Hall, the academy's main academic building. Frank was working his usual night shift, cleaning classrooms and offices after the day's academic activities had ended. The building was supposed to be empty except for security guards and maintenance staff, but as Frank approached room 214, he heard voices coming from inside. Frank's first thought was that a professor was working late with students, which wasn't uncommon at West Point. But as he listened more carefully, Frank realized that the conversation wasn't taking place in English. The voices were speaking Chinese, which immediately caught Frank's attention because his intelligence background had included extensive training in recognizing foreign languages and understanding their implications for security. Frank listened more carefully and realized that what he was hearing wasn't a casual conversation or even a language lesson. The Chinese speakers were conducting what appeared to be a formal training session, using military and intelligence terminology that Frank recognized from his counterintelligence work. Frank's intelligence training kicked in. Unauthorized use of West Point facilities for foreign language training, especially training that involved military and intelligence concepts, was a serious security concern that needed immediate investigation. Frank discreetly positioned himself outside room 214 and began documenting what he was hearing. His Chinese language skills were limited, but he could recognize enough military and technical terms to understand that the training session was focused on intelligence gathering techniques and infiltration methods. More concerning was Frank's recognition of some of the voices. While he couldn't identify specific individuals, the accent patterns and speaking styles suggested that at least some of the participants were not native Chinese speakers, but Americans who had been trained to speak Chinese for operational purposes. Frank realized that he might be witnessing a training session for American personnel who were being prepared for intelligence operations in China, or possibly Chinese nationals who were being trained for operations in the United States. Either possibility represented activities that should not have been taking place in an unauthorized location at West Point, without proper security oversight and approval. Frank continued his observation for the next hour, documenting the timing, number of participants, and general content of the training session. When the session ended, he carefully observed the participants as they left the building. What Frank saw confirmed his worst suspicions. The group consisted of approximately 8 individuals, including what appeared to be both American and Chinese participants. Some were dressed in civilian clothing that suggested academic or professional backgrounds, while others wore clothing that could have been military uniforms without insignia. Most concerning was Frank's observation that several participants appeared to be taking extensive notes and photographs of West Point facilities as they left the building, behavior that suggested intelligence gathering rather than legitimate academic or cultural exchange activities. Frank faced a serious decision about how to proceed. If what he had witnessed was indeed unauthorized intelligence training involving foreign nationals, it represented a major security breach at one of America's most sensitive military institutions. But Frank also knew that making false accusations about espionage activities could have serious consequences for innocent people and could damage his own credibility if he was wrong about what he had observed. Frank decided to conduct additional surveillance before reporting his observations to authorities. Over the next 2 weeks, Frank carefully monitored room 214 and other areas of Thayer Hall for similar activities. What he discovered was deeply troubling. The Chinese language training sessions were part of a regular schedule that took place 3 times per week, always during night hours when the building was supposed to be empty. The sessions followed a structured curriculum that appeared to focus on intelligence gathering techniques, surveillance methods, and infiltration procedures. Frank also discovered that the training program involved access to areas of West Point that should have been restricted to authorized personnel only. Participants were conducting exercises in academic buildings, administrative offices, and even areas near sensitive military facilities on the academy grounds. Most concerning was Frank's observation that some training exercises appeared to involve actual intelligence gathering activities directed at West Point faculty, staff, and cadets. Participants were practicing surveillance techniques on real targets and gathering information that could be used for espionage purposes. Frank realized that he was witnessing not just unauthorized training, but an active intelligence operation targeting West Point itself. Frank contacted the FBI's counterintelligence division and requested an urgent meeting with agents who specialized in foreign intelligence operations targeting American military institutions. Special Agent Patricia Chen met with Frank at a secure location off the West Point campus. Agent Chen had extensive experience investigating Chinese intelligence operations in the United States and immediately understood the significance of Frank's observations. "Miller," Agent Chen said after reviewing Frank's documentation, "what you've uncovered appears to be a sophisticated intelligence operation targeting West Point. Chinese intelligence services have been increasingly aggressive in their efforts to infiltrate American military institutions and gather information about our military capabilities and training methods." Agent Chen explained that the FBI had been investigating reports of suspicious activities at several military academies, but hadn't been able to identify the scope or methods of the intelligence operations. Frank's counterintelligence background had allowed him to recognize operational patterns that other maintenance workers would have missed, and his systematic observation had provided crucial evidence about how the intelligence operation was being conducted.
We need your help to gather additional evidence and understand the full scope of this operation, Agent Chen continued. Your position gives you perfect access to monitor these activities and document their intelligence-gathering efforts without arousing suspicion. Frank agreed to cooperate with the FBI investigation while continuing his normal janitorial duties. Over the next month, he worked with federal agents to monitor the suspected intelligence operation and gather evidence of espionage activities. The investigation revealed that the intelligence operation at West Point was part of a much larger Chinese effort to infiltrate American military institutions. Similar operations had been identified at the Naval Academy, Air Force Academy, and several military colleges around the country. The Chinese intelligence service had been using a combination of recruited American personnel and Chinese nationals posing as exchange students or academic researchers to gather detailed information about American military training methods, strategic doctrines, and institutional vulnerabilities. Frank's evidence was crucial for understanding how the operatives had gained access to West Point facilities and what information they had been gathering during their intelligence operations. The investigation led to the arrest of 12 individuals involved in the West Point intelligence operation, including both Chinese nationals and American citizens who had been recruited to assist with espionage activities. The arrests disrupted what federal investigators determined was one of the most successful foreign intelligence operations ever conducted against American military academies. Agent Chen called Frank after the conclusion of the investigation to thank him for his contribution. Mr. Miller, your counterintelligence experience and decision to investigate suspicious activities prevented massive intelligence losses that could have compromised American military security for years. The information these operatives were gathering would have given foreign adversaries detailed knowledge of how we train our future military leaders. Frank felt a familiar sense of satisfaction that he remembered from his intelligence career. His specialized training had once again been used to protect American military institutions from foreign threats, even though he was now working as a civilian maintenance worker. Frank continued working as a janitor at West Point, but he also began working more closely with Academy security and federal agencies to identify and prevent foreign intelligence operations targeting the institution. His experience with the Chinese intelligence operation led to enhanced security procedures at West Point and improved training for faculty and staff on recognizing and reporting suspicious activities. But Frank's most important realization was that his counterintelligence training remained valuable even in civilian maintenance work. The analytical skills and threat recognition capabilities he'd developed during 20 years of intelligence work continued to serve national security interests in his janitorial career. On quiet nights as he cleaned the historic halls of West Point, surrounded by portraits of famous American military leaders and the traditions of 2 centuries of military excellence, Frank often reflected on how his career transition from intelligence analyst to janitor had evolved into a different form of protective service. The same skills he'd used to identify and neutralize foreign intelligence threats continued to protect one of America's most important military institutions, just through different methods and in coordination with civilian rather than military authorities. Frank had learned that the most important counterintelligence often came not from official security operations conducted by trained agents, but from vigilant individuals who remained alert to threats and willing to use their specialized knowledge when they recognized danger. The last witness to his military intelligence career had become the first line of defense against those who would exploit America's military academies for espionage purposes. It wasn't the intelligence career Frank had planned to continue after retirement, but it was the service West Point and the future military leaders trained there needed him to provide. And that, he'd learned, was more than enough purpose for any intelligence professional, whether analyzing threats in a classified facility or cleaning classrooms where America's future generals and admirals were learning the skills they would need to defend their country. In the quiet hours before dawn, as Frank completed his cleaning rounds and ensured that West Point's facilities were ready for another day of military education, he sometimes allowed himself to appreciate the honor of serving an institution that had produced some of America's greatest military leaders. The cadets who walked these halls would someday be responsible for protecting American interests around the world. Frank's job was to ensure that the place where they learned those responsibilities remained secure from those who would exploit it for hostile purposes. Frank smiled as he turned off the lights in the last classroom of his shift, knowing that his intelligence-trained eyes would continue watching for threats that others might miss, ensuring that West Point remained a place of learning, rather than a target for espionage. Thank you for listening to this incredible story here on The Last Witness. If you enjoyed Frank's journey from military intelligence analyst to West Point janitor to counterintelligence protector, and want to hear more amazing tales of ordinary people who become the final witnesses to extraordinary events, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you these untold stories that deserve to be heard. What did you think about Frank's decision to conduct his own surveillance before contacting authorities? Do you believe people with intelligence backgrounds have special responsibilities to remain vigilant even in civilian careers? Let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts on these stories. And remember, sometimes the most important national security work happens not in government agencies, but in the everyday places where trained professionals refuse to ignore the warning signs around them. Until next time, keep listening and keep witnessing the truth.